From the shadow, it's looking like the boys got the win.
Boys got it.
All right, you guys can count that as your cardio for the day. You got a nice little workout in. Now, Noah, who's giving the message today? Who do we have?
Oh, we got Andrew up here who's going to step up for us. Give us kind of like a little round.
Stepping up to the plate.
Stepping up to the plate. So let's listen up.
All right. Can you guys hear me all right? Yeah, cool. Well, hey, my name's Andrew. I think I know most of you. If not, would love to get to know you after. But we are currently in our third week of a wisdom series. And by way of, for some of you guys to get to know me, how many, just by raise of hands, how many of you have siblings? Okay, so most of us. All right, so when I share this story, I'm going to have some people that like really relate to me and make me feel seen in this. But anyways, I am the youngest of 2 siblings. And growing up, we would love to go on family vacations. And so our family would take us down south. And because of that, we'd go down south with 3 siblings. We had to do it on a budget, right? And so when we go down, and after, there's some feedback. When we would go down, we would go to get some ice cream or to go get a slushie after the beach or after whatever event it was that we were doing. And in light of having 3 siblings, the dessert had to go 3 ways. And by way of evening, what my parents said, evening out the playing field, they would set a timer in the front of the car. So just picture like game show, like timer in front of the car. And whenever the timer ran out, you had to pass the ice cream cone to the next sibling. So it was fair. Everyone got the same amount of time. But like I said, I was the youngest, and so my sisters were both older than me and bigger than me, and apparently had an ability to make things disappear by the time they got to the back of the car. So that wasn't great, but whenever my turn would come up to get the ice cream cone, it would be like all melted and like deformed, and there'd be like a bite out of the side, and there was like really not much for me to eat. But anyways, I'd get started on the ice cream cone, and right as I felt like I was making some progress, I would hear the buzzer from the timer come up. And I would just think, are you kidding me? Like, I'm already the youngest, and so I get like last dibs on everything. I don't get to pick where we go, and I get the ice cream cone back, and I barely get any time. And so I bet some of you guys can relate to that in wishing that you had more time or just a little bit more time in your day. I certainly know that I did, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about. I think everyone wishes that they had more time. We live like we have unlimited time, but the reality is that we don't. How many of you guys have said something like this? Well, you know, it's okay if I don't do my homework tonight. I'm really tired, had a long day of work or a long day of doing whatever. I'll do it before school tomorrow. I'll wake up early and do it before school tomorrow. That's what I lived by and died by. I would be like, well, I'll just do it in the morning before school. That's the biggest lie that I would ever tell myself. Or secondly, well, it's okay if I'm playing video games all summer because I still have a month left, right? Or someone over here might be familiar with this one. Well, like, I'm really taking care of myself by sleeping until noon, right? Because, you know, like, heck, I have the time, right? But we all say and do these things because we think that we have unlimited time, but the reality is that we don't. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is we live like we have unlimited time, but we don't. And Scripture has this to say about this mindset that some of us can approach life with when we think that we have just time endlessly at our disposal. It's Proverbs 27:1, and it says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring." I believe that many of us, and even myself at times, many of us live like tomorrow is guaranteed, but it's not. And many of us even approach some of our relationships that way and circumstances in our lives. We believe that we'll see people, friends, and family like we did the day before. But like this verse says, we do not know what a day may bring. And so that begs the question that we're going to focus on tonight. And the question is, how can I make the most of my time? We're in a series, we're in week 3 of a series on wisdom, and making the most of our time is going to be what we're going to focus on here in week 3. And so by way of opening up, would you guys join me in Ephesians 5? It's going to be in the New Testament part of your Bible. So if you have a physical Bible, pull that out. If you have a phone, now a lot of you guys have phones out, pull your Bible out. And as you're getting that out, again, like I said, Ephesians 5, verses 15 to 17, I just want to give a little bit of context before. This passage that we're going to look at, Paul, the writer of this story, is talking about, hey, if you're a Christian, if you're following God, how can you make the best use of your time? Because a lot of us live like we have unlimited time, and in the end, look like fools with our time. To be honest with you, in preparing this, I was thinking about in the past, over my life, how have I used my time? And when I think about when I was your age, in middle school or high school, so much of my time was spent chasing sports, popularity, and things that I thought would give me opportunities in life. And then plus on all of that, I would tack God onto it and want him to bless it. And in reality, I wasn't following God, I was following my own priorities. And so, life happens. There were injuries and circumstances that came about in life that made that stuff come crashing down. And it really caused within me a heart change and a desire in me that, I want to make the most of my life. I want to live a life that counts. I want to live a life that follows Jesus. I came to a point where I met Jesus. I was reading the Bible and I met Jesus. And I go, okay, I've lived my life up to this point in a certain way, and I don't want to do that anymore. I want to chase God's desires. I want to do what the Lord wants me to do in my life. And so there was a perspective switch in me that says, I want to make the most of my life. Nobody wants to be a fool with their time. And it's because of this. You can't live the full life while living like a fool. Joshua brought that up in the beginning. Grace Youth exists to invite you to the full life that Jesus has for you. And we believe that's filled with peace, purpose, and meaning. Jesus says in John 10:10, I came that you would have life and life to the full. And so if Jesus came to earth, died on the cross and resurrected for us to have full life as Christians, then we want to know and understand, hey, what does that mean for us to live the full life? And part of what it means to live the full life is to make the most of every opportunity that he gives us here on earth. And so we're going to read that passage that I had you guys open up to, Ephesians 5, and he's going to give us three concrete ways that we can make the most of our time. So let's look at what Paul says in Ephesians 5. Starting in verse 15, he says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. So Paul here is writing to the church in Ephesus, and he's saying, hey, in order for you guys to live the full life, in order for you guys to live in a way that is wise rather than unwise, I'm going to give you 3 clear and concrete ways in which you can use your time to honor God and to live the full life. So we're going to go back to verse 15. If you have a highlighter or if you have a pen, or just I want you to take a mental snapshot of this because we're going to do a deep dive into this. In verse 15, he says, be very careful. Circle that. Underline that. Do whatever you need to do to remember that. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. A key word here in this verse that's highlighted is the word live. And in some translations of the Bible, it translates it as walk. And if you guys read the rest of Ephesians 5, I'd really highly encourage you to read it. It was something that was really encouraging to me this week. Ephesians 5 uses the word live or walk 3 times. 3 times in chapter 5. And he's writing this, he uses that word 3 times because oftentimes we don't hear things the first time. He uses it 3 times to get across the point of, hey, we need to be careful in the way that we direct and aim our life. We need to be cognitive. We need to be aware and reflect and go, what is the way in which I'm ordering my life? How am I walking the path of life that God has given me? So this is something that we need to be very careful of. And Paul is saying that our walk, my life, should really ultimately be pointed towards Jesus. My walk and my life should be in line with Jesus. So for us to live carefully, we should look to Jesus because that's ultimately the wise thing. For us to live carefully then, we should look towards Jesus' example. Those 3 points I was talking about, that's going to be the first one. With my time, I need to use it carefully. And so if I'm to live carefully, then I need to look towards Jesus as my example of what it means to make the most of my time. And this is something that we need to be intentional with, because modeling Jesus is not just something that we drift into. That's an everyday decision that we need to come to and say, I want my life to reflect Jesus to those around me, those closest and those farthest from me. And Paul gives us this command earlier in the 5th chapter of Ephesians in verses 1 and 2. He says this, "Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us." So, if I'm to live, if I'm to walk carefully, Paul says that we need to first follow Jesus. That's step one. If I want to live a life that counts, if I want to live a life that makes the most of the time God's given me, I first need to follow Jesus. And in order for you to know how to make the most of your time, you need to know how Jesus walked and the way that he lived his life. And I firmly believe that Jesus was the ultimate example of what it meant to be selfless. I believe that Jesus lived a life where he came to serve and not to be served. That he came and lived a sinless life and showed us how we're to treat others and how to have relationship with God. And it all culminated in him dying on the cross for the sins of the world. So he didn't only serve, but he gave of his life for us because he loves us. And so right there, we're saying, if we're to follow Jesus' example, if we're to live carefully, we need to look at the way that Jesus lived and the way that he utilized his time. And the way that Jesus utilized his time was serving others and giving his life for the betterment of others, and so that you and me could come to know God. So, to live carefully is to ask this: how are my words, actions, and attitudes reflecting Jesus' example? We just talked about his example. He served and he gave his life. How are my words, actions, and attitudes reflecting Jesus' example? The key to using our time carefully, to be using our time wisely, is to not use it carefully. The key to using your time carefully is to use your time looking at Jesus and directing your attention towards Jesus and modeling Jesus. Because if my only goal and hope is, well, I just want to use my time wisely, then it's ultimately about me. But if my life direction is aimed at the example that Jesus has given me in the Bible, that the witness that he's done, the work he's done in my life, then ultimately my purpose behind using my time wisely by making the most of my time is to honor Jesus. And it recognizes that, hey, God has given me a specific set time on this earth, and I want to maximize it to the full so that people can know Jesus and that I can know Jesus better. And Paul gives us two concrete ways. Okay, so Andrew, you're saying use your time carefully, follow the example of Jesus. What does that look like specifically for me in my life? And Paul gives us those two examples. He's not going to just tell us what to do. He's going to show us how to do it. He gives us two examples in Ephesians 5. And the one is to walk in the way of love, and the second is to live as children of light. In Ephesians 5, verse 8 and 9, he says, live, there's that word again, live, remember that, live as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. So, for us to live carefully, we are to live and to serve and love others so that they would know Jesus. I'm to live in a way, to walk in such a way that it influences people to follow Jesus. Have you ever had those people, maybe it's a small group leader or a parent, and I'm just like thinking of this off the top of my head. There are those people in your life, whenever you hear about their faith in Jesus, that it just makes you look at them and you just go, man, like, I would love to have a relationship with Jesus like that. Or man, I would love to be sure of who I am like that person is because of their relationship with Jesus. And so ultimately, for you to make the most of your time here on earth is for you to know Jesus. And the byproduct of you knowing Jesus is you being a light to the areas that he's put you in. That is the ultimate way in which you can use your time. And we do this by spending our time intentionally. We have to spend it intentionally. In verse 16, and we read this before, but in verse 16, Paul says, making the most of every opportunity, circle that, every opportunity, because the days are evil. One of the, uncomfortable or worst, or maybe you guys can relate to it, but one of the most uncomfortable points in my week is when I'll be on Instagram or just doing whatever on my phone, and that notification comes down, and it says, your screen time was up 33% from the week before. And I just go, oh man, that's tough. I thought I was doing better this week than I thought I was. And maybe you guys relate to that, or maybe not. But the reason that's uncomfortable for me and that it's uncomfortable for a lot of people is because it shows us the reality that a lot of us, and maybe not all of us, a lot of us would much rather prefer to live through the eyes of other people on social media than with the time and the life that God has given us. And so that's something that I've had to talk to God about and something that I've had to pray about God with of how can I steward my phone in a way where it's not getting in the way of me living a life that's sold out for you. And I believe that to make the most of every opportunity, we need to see it the way that Paul sees it, that the way that the Bible talks about it. And he says that we should make the most of every opportunity because every opportunity for you guys, whether that's in school or with the remainder of your summer or at the job that you have right now, every opportunity, Paul is saying, is an opportunity for you guys to model Jesus to people, for you guys to model his grace and his love towards people. And he's saying that this matters because he says the days are evil. And he's not saying every day, like every single day on earth is evil, but he's saying that we live in a world that is constantly pulling us and humanity away from God. And so in a world that doesn't follow God, you guys can be an example of people that follow God and that have a relationship with him. And you guys do relationships in a way that other people don't naturally because of your relationship with Jesus. And so in light of the days being evil, we need to make the most of every opportunity that we have with people because we realize that time isn't a given thing, it's a gift. And if I recognize it as a gift from God, I want to spend it wisely. I want to be careful with how I go about using my time. And the culture around us will promise us freedom and fulfillment. But if we're not careful, it can hold us captive because the days are evil, because it will distract us from God. We end up giving away years of our lives because we walk aimlessly, or we don't know who we are, or we don't recognize what's on the line for my relationship with God and other people that don't have a relationship with God. And in the end, we prove to be foolish handlers of our times rather than wise handlers of our times. So in a world that's confusing and changing, Paul says, thirdly, this is the third way that we can use our time wisely, that we need to choose God's way daily. To choose God's way daily. The first one was to live carefully, spend it intentionally, and this last way is choose God's way daily. And in the last verse here that we have in Ephesians, Paul says, therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. A fool is someone who ultimately knows what they should do, but they choose not to do it. Again, a fool is someone who knows what they ought to do, but they choose not to do. And Paul's saying, don't live that way. Don't choose that way. He's saying if you're gonna do one thing with your life, there's a lot of things you can do with your life. If there's one thing that you can do with your life that's gonna make your time count, it's understanding what the Lord's will is, what his desire is. Whenever if you've heard people say the Lord's will and you don't necessarily know what that means, it's to know what his desire is, his deepest desire is. And his deepest desire is to be in relationship with you guys. I believe firmly that God created us for a relationship with him. He's created us in his image, and we were meant for relationship with him. But ultimately, we have a really big issue, and that's sin. That our parents, Adam and Eve, sinned, and our relationship with God broke apart. All of humanity is separated from God because of this issue called sin. And Jesus came to earth, lived a sinless life, lived a perfect life, lived a way that we should have lived, but we choose not to live. He died death on the cross. He resurrected, and he defeated sin and death so that you could have a relationship with God, so that you could experience what the full life is. Not just so that you could be forgiven of your sins, but that you would be free and that you would ultimately know, okay, now that I'm following Jesus, what is it that I'm ultimately supposed to do with my life? What would you have me do, Lord, with the rest of my time now that I'm following you? And you've done a work in my heart. What do you want me to do with that? And he's saying, I want you to use your time to make me known. I want you to use the rest of your days getting to know me and forming a relationship with me and you helping other people create a relationship with me through Jesus. And so what this ultimately looks like, Paul says, is, yes, I want you to know Jesus because he's the Savior of the world. He's our forgiveness. He is our peace. But what you do with that after, he shows us in Ephesians 5 that we are to live carefully, that we are to spend our time intentionally, and that we are to choose God's way daily. And what he says of that is that, hey, you should walk as a child of love. You should walk in the way of love because you've been loved by God. You should walk as children of the light. You should be an influence, a positive influence to a dark world because of your relationship with God. A person that does that lives the full life. A person that does that makes the most of their time here on earth. His will is that we would know Jesus, be with Jesus, and become like Jesus. And to make the most of our time, like I said, it's to use it carefully, use our time carefully, spend it intentionally, and to choose God's way daily. One of the best things you could do, because a sermon isn't a sermon if it doesn't help you apply it. So one of the best things that you can do is to evaluate yourself right now, and if not right now, before you go to bed tonight and throughout the week. How am I spending my time? And how can I rearrange my schedule so God's priorities are at the forefront? And that doesn't mean that you can't still do things that you want to do, but it's saying, I'm going to seek his kingdom, I'm going to seek his purposes and his will first in my life, and I trust that he'll make everything else work out in its proper order. And so what we're going to do now is a challenge, whether you have a notes app or if you have notes on, like if you brought a notebook, I want you guys to write this down. We're going to go through something right now, all of us, and we're going to say, what do I need to subtract out of my life? And you'll see the thing behind me. What do I need to subtract out of my life? What do I need to add to my life? What do I need to increase in my life? And what do I need to decrease in my life? So to start with addition, does this look, and we need to start with subtraction. I was on the wrong order. Do this before anything else. Before you add anything, we need to subtract one thing that gets removed. And maybe it's asking yourself this. Based on the limited time God has for me, is this, what I'm doing, is this a wise use of my time? And if it's not, then it's something that can get subtracted. Remember, Paul said in the verses that we read tonight, he said, be very careful with your time. Make the most of every opportunity. Understand what the Lord's will is. And that means that we don't just spend our time, we spend it carefully. And sometimes the wisest choice is to subtract something that's good so we have room for something that's better. When we see Jesus as he should be, we see him as that which is better. And so I'm not just subtracting things out of my life to subtract things. I'm subtracting things because I see how good and great Jesus is and how good he's been to me and the work that he's done in me. And so in light of that, I take the things that I love out of my life for the thing that I love even more. Every yes is a no to something, and every no is a yes to something else. Maybe that's a helpful way for you to think about it. Now for addition, maybe this summer, and maybe even in the sermon you're thinking, I've been trying to follow Jesus. I made a decision, but I'm really ready to go all in. I'm really ready to see what the full life that Jesus has for me is about. And really easy ways for you to apply that in your life, and that third point is seeking God's way daily. And for you guys, that's, hey, maybe before you go to practice in the mornings or before you go to school or before you go to work, getting in the Word first thing in the morning. It's a non-negotiable. There's negotiables in life and there's non-negotiables. And making that, hey, it's a non-negotiable. Before I do anything else in the day, I'm going to get in God's Word and see what his will is and to see what he has to say about me as his child. Because when we do that, everything else flows from that. We live with purpose and we live with meaning. Or it's, you're in prayer. But maybe the thing is, well, I don't really have time for prayer. Most of us have time for prayer. We say we don't, but we have time for prayer. Maybe you're in the car. Maybe it's on the way home after work and you're tired and you have maybe 15 to 20 minutes on your drive, and maybe you use 10 to 15 minutes of that time to just talk to God or to sit in silence with God and to really ask him, hey, Lord, like, what would you have to say to me today? Or, hey, what would you have me do today to make the most of my time? And thirdly, maybe it's committing to come to youth each week. Hey, I want to come to youth because I see a group of kids that are my age that are all wanting to commit to following Jesus. And we do life best when we do it together. And so having a group of people there that you see that are studying the Bible, that are praying, that are hanging out after can give you a good support system for the full life that Jesus has for you. And the third thing is what needs to increase. Maybe it's something that's already in your schedule. You've started to put it in your schedule, but you could argue and say, hey, that needs to take more of a priority in my life. Maybe it's spending time with your siblings and seeing how you can impact their walks with Jesus. Maybe they're not to a point where they're following Jesus. Or they did follow Jesus at that time, but maybe they've grown discouraged, or maybe they've stopped coming to church. And you're saying, hey, I want to take this Jesus thing seriously. And so for me, my next step for following Jesus would be maybe sitting down with them and saying, hey, do you want to study the Bible with me? Hey, could I pray with you? Or, hey, do you just want to hang out? Or maybe it's getting outside. Maybe it's you've been inside most of the summer and you need to get outside more. Maybe it's reading a book, or I don't know, or spending time with God. It could be many things. Again, we should, like Paul says, make the most of every opportunity. And that doesn't mean just staying busy. It means filling our time with things that will help us grow and align with who God says we are and where he wants us to go. And lastly, things that need to decrease. Maybe for you, you looked at your screen time and you go, that's pretty high. I could take an hour off of my screen time, or 30 minutes off my screen time, or 20 minutes off my screen time, and give that to God for time in the Bible, or time in prayer, or time in investing in others. Remember, the goal is to use one of the most valuable resources, time, the best way we can. Where can you cut back? Maybe for you during the sermon, or maybe this is something that you've thought throughout the summer or throughout your time at youth of, I am following God. I want to serve him in a way, but I'm not sure how. Well, a great way for you to do that is, hey, we have a kids ministry in the morning, Grace Kids. Noah, Marty, and Bryson were helping me out this morning. Maybe for you it's, hey, my next step in using my time to the best of my ability would be helping kids follow Jesus, to be hanging out with kids in the morning and playing Gaga Ball with them, or helping them go through a Bible lesson. Or maybe for some of you, it's like we said, it's getting into the Bible more, or it's committing to an hour and a half or so to come to youth each Sunday night. Because when we take steps towards Jesus, we ultimately align ourselves and conform ourselves into more of what he wants us to be. And so I want to give you guys time. We've talked about what you could subtract, what you could add, what you could increase, and what you could decrease. And I want to give us like 2 minutes for us to pray, for you guys to have time with God to seek what he would have you do. And I really want you guys to take this to heart. Maybe it's writing it down so that you can keep a tab on it of, I really feel like God is wanting me to do this, and I want to write this down and tell this to someone so that they can help me walk this out. So I'm going to give us a minute or two. I want you guys to talk to God about, God, what would you have me do with my life to make the most of the time that you've given me? And at the end of that time, I'll close us in prayer. So would you guys bow your heads and let's all just take a minute or two to talk to God.